The Pink Pulpits Podcast, the gospel according to her. The Pink Pulpits Podcast explores the living, learning, and leading of women in the 21st century. How does the modern woman handle the world the gospel way? This podcast is for women in ministry, women surrounded by ministry, and so many more. Join us weekly on Saturdays at 6 p.m. for the Pink Pulpits Podcast, the gospel.
Hey everybody,
to
welcome to the Pink Pulpit Podcast. This is getting ready to be an episode that you do not want to miss. But I want to welcome you to the gospel according to her. This is the platform of life's gospel by women, for women, and no matter your ministry, whether you're in the pulpit of the church or the pulpit of life or the pulpit of the marketplace, this is the podcast where you will hear real stories from real women with real ministry and real life impact that matters. I want you to get ready for an opportunity to experience through a female lens how to tackle life's issues and do it in a way that continues to show love, learning, and leaning in. It is time for you to get ready for the gospel according to her. The entire month we have been in this Power of series. And I love series because it really helps you to kind of build upon what you learned or what you heard before. And so today I want to talk about the power of letting go. And I am the faith coach, Lady Nicole Green. And this is an area that I believe a lot of us wrestle with probably the most. It's an area that can be challenging to do because we want to hold on to some things that we know we need to get rid of, and they hold us up. So have you ever been in a lunch or a dinner or in an event seated around someone that harmed you, someone that betrayed you, someone that lied on you or lied to you? Have you ever been back in the company of a person or persons that did something that you were holding on to and you knew you really needed to let it go? It reminds me of the story of Joseph. In Genesis 50, 19 and 20, it says, "But Joseph replied, 'Do not be afraid of me. Am I God that I could punish you? You intended to harm me, but God intended it for all good. He brought me to this position so I could save the lives of many.'" It's kind of that scripture that says that God will make it work together for your good. Here it was that Joseph was seated at the dinner table with the very ones that had harmed him. And these men were his brothers, but they had caused him more pain than he had once thought was even possible. And you may in this moment be thinking about that person that harmed you, that person that lied on you. It may be a relative, it could be a co-worker, it could be a friend, and a friend that you may have had for 20 or 30 years. And I don't know if you recognize, for Joseph, this was a serious situation because his brothers had left him for dead. And they had sold him into slavery in Egypt. And he was falsely accused. He was tossed into prison. He was forgotten about many times. And it seemed like an eternity. What he was going through seemed like something that was going on, and there was no end to it. And even what you may be holding on to right now may seem like that person harmed you, and you may still be in the middle of it. Or you may be on the other side of it, but it seemed like it took a toll on your life and took a toll on your reputation, or took a toll just on you. That wasn't even the worst of what happened to Joseph. His brothers had robbed him of more than a decade of time with their father. Jacob hadn't been able to see his son grow into a man marry the woman of his choosing, and build a family. They stole the life Joseph might have had. And indeed, everyone back home thought he was dead. In fact, he was dead. Seeing his brothers again was hard. And when they had returned with the youngest brother, Benjamin, it was too much for Joseph. And Joseph had dinner served to his brothers, but he rushed to his chambers, if you remember that story, and he needed time to himself, time to let out the tears, let out the pain that he could no longer hold back. And I'm talking to someone this podcast, and you may be saying to yourself, that sounds like what I'm going through right now. I was just in that situation, or I'm getting ready to come into a moment where I'm getting ready to see that person again. Or you may have been in that moment and you didn't hold it back. You went off on them, or you told them a little bit about themselves. Alone in the room, Joseph, he wept bitterly. And they say that time has a way of healing old wounds, but this wound eased and it oozed out painfully, bitterly. And if it had just happened, is that you? That you find yourself in that very moment feeling that same way? Saying to yourself, it feels like it just happened in this moment at this time. You may have a wound that your mother calls, a wound that your father calls, or someone that you thought would never do that, and they've done it. The first time Joseph saw his brothers in Egypt was nearly 2 decades after they had sold him into slavery. And all of them were grown men by that time, and some were even grandfathers. And despite the years, the aging, and the distance, Joseph recognized them as his brothers. Yet they saw only a powerful Egyptian who had food they could buy amid a terrible time that was happening. And I don't know about you, but you may be in a different place, in a different season, and the person may have even forgot about what they did. And they may be acting like nothing ever happened. They may not recognize you in this new space. That happened to me one time. It was years later, and something had happened to me in high school, and I saw this person years later, and they were having a conversation with me, and it was like, I'm thinking to myself, do they remember the last time and what happened? But I had something that person could benefit from, so they didn't even see me as that teenage girl. And what I want you guys to understand is that in those moments, you've got to really make a decision whether you're going to let it go or not. You got to make a decision whether you're going to
enjoying the Pink Pulpits podcast.
Hurt, the pain,
be sure to like and follow us on Spotify at Pink Pulpits Podcast.
Be something that
subscribe to our YouTube at Pink Pulpits Podcast.
To let it go.
Like and save our website at pinkpulpits.org and get our amazing No More Silly Women app to get all updates on the Pink Pulpits Podcast. And remember, it's the gospel speaks. According to her.
He had an Egyptian wife and family. By no means did he appear to be anyone other than the second most powerful man in Egypt. And these Hebrew travelers had no idea the man to whom they had bowed was actually their brother. And that was what was happening to me in that moment. I don't think that person recognized who I was. And in my mind, I'm thinking, they gotta know. But here was Joseph's brothers didn't even recognize him. Upon seeing his brothers, Joseph needed a way to keep them close. So he devised a plan. He inquired about his younger brother, Benjamin, and his father, and required his brothers to bring Benjamin to Egypt if they were to receive any more aid. And he was glad to hear his brother and father were still alive and well, and he had to see Benjamin for himself. I'm not telling you to devise a plan if that person doesn't recognize you or acts like they didn't do anything. I just believe that sometimes people are in spaces where they're outside of themselves, and they may now have grown to a place where they're better and they're not that person who they used to be. And then you have to decide, are you going to hold on to the person they were? Or are you going to let it go and allow the new of who they are to be that person that now you're engaging with? All the bad things that had happened to Joseph in that last 19 years must have been at the forefront of his mind as he stood in his room weeping. And I don't know about you, but I imagine like I was in that moment. I mean, my blood was pumping, my heart was beating through it. I thought they could hear my heart, because in that moment, everything is rushing. The thoughts are rushing, the disappointment is rushing, the hurt is rushing. And I'm getting even vengeful, if I may say it, in this moment. But seeing Benjamin was a stark reminder of all he had lost, all the moments he had missed out on. Yet, as much as Joseph might have wanted to hate his brothers and to cause them harm and that same hurt, he could not really. He knew that if it hadn't been for the evil plan, he wouldn't have been in the current position that he was in. If his brothers hadn't done any of that stuff to him, he couldn't be who he was today, able to help them. And for me, that was the same thing. I was in a position to help that person. I can't say what they did put me in that position, but I was now in a different position in life. And I do believe I learned from that experience, and that it helped to mold me into the person that I was at that point. And I had a decision to make, to let it go or to move past it. God had even given him the dream of what he was seeing, that his brothers would bow down. And his family thought his dreams were crazy. His brothers were even trying to kill him over it. Yet he still could not hate them, because what God had showed him was happening. Later, after Joseph tricked his brothers into thinking he was going to take Benjamin prisoner, he decided to give up the charade. He probably wasn't sure that he probably wasn't sure what he would say, but he believed that all of what had happened to him had happened for him to be in the position that he was. He knew who he was, so he simply just said, I am Joseph, your brother, whom you sold into slavery. But don't be upset and don't be angry with yourselves for selling me to this place. It was God who sent me here ahead of you to preserve your life. And I invite you today to let it go, that there's power in it. It puts you in a new position to be able to extend grace, to extend a hope and a help that you may not have been able to give if you weren't in the position you currently end up being. As Joseph spoke words of forgiving and kindness to the same people, his brothers that had not spoken kindness to him, he was able to embrace his brothers. He kissed them, weeping over them. And I don't know about you, but I have an imagination that says Joseph must have felt in that moment liberated and free. Letting go gives you liberation and freedom that you can't have holding on to it. I know, because I've experienced the power of letting go. In that situation that I was talking about, in that moment, everything in me said, don't let it go, hold on to it, go off. Say, do you know, do you remember? But it was life-changing that I decided to just let it go. I never even brought it up. And the whole night, if I'm honest with you, I thought about it. I thought about saying something. I thought about going off. But every hour that I was there, every second that I was there, every minute that I was there, I kept saying to myself, let it go, let it go, let it go, let it go. Now, it took several times of me saying it. I said it to myself, not out loud, but it was a liberation and a freedom. And even driving in the car, I started crying. But it was the cry of everything I've been holding on to all of that time. And I didn't even know that it had made the impression that it had made. I knew it hurt me in that moment in high school, but man, all these years later, and that letting go and not retaliating and not seeking vengeance and not holding what I could do to help freed me. The power of letting go is a freedom. And I invite you today to be free, to let it go and take the power of what letting go will do for you. If it is like me, I helped that person. I did. And even a little residue was there as I was doing it, saying I shouldn't do it. But man, I'm telling you, I'm glad that I did. And I believe it allowed now for God to do even greater, bigger things in my life. I think that I received favor from God the way that I do is because I decided to let it go. And even in this moment, I have something that I'm thinking about that I need to let go of. I ain't even thought about it until I'm talking to you right now. So if you have something that you know you need to let go of, know there's power and freedom in it. Do it today. You don't even, somebody say, do I have to call the person up? You might. If it's somebody that you're going to see on a regular, you might call them, ask them out for coffee. Ask them out for a tea and say, hey, let's clear the air. Let's get the space together. Let's make freedom happen. I want to let it go. And so I invite you today to let it go and take the power that belongs to you and walk in freedom, liberation, and then I believe a new grace will fall on your life. This has been the Pink Pulpit Podcast with Lady Nicole Green. I know this is the gospel according to her. This is about real women, real life, ministry, whether you're in the pulpit of life or the pulpit of ministry. We have a pulpit, and we've got to live in it, knowing that there's power that can be released as we learn and lean into the gospel according to her. I'll see you next time for another episode. And I don't know about you, but life's gospel from women, by women, it's pretty cool. I'll see you next time.
Tune in next week for the Pink Pulpits Podcast, the gospel according to her. Be sure to like, follow, share, and subscribe to this amazing weekly podcast with your host, Lady Nicole Green. That's right, the Pink Pulpits Podcast, the gospel according to her.